I work in a photo lab, and one of the things that we do is monitor our processors with control strips. So the processors are a traditional photographic process where they have a developer and a bleach fix and a stabilizer, which is sort of like a wash. And you run a control strip from the manufacturer. We use Fuji control strips, and they're pre-exposed, and you run it through your processor, and then you measure each one of these patches, stain or D-min, low density, high density, D-max, and then yellow max, Y-max. You read those on the strip that you processed yourself, but the manufacturer also sends you a control strip that they've processed and that you use as a reference. So you'll run yours, read the different patches, and then you'll compare them to the reference strip and subtract the difference and see how your process is compared to what the manufacturer says it should be. Now, Fuji makes some software to do this called Oasis. It's pretty good software. I like it. It's just it's a little tedious to use. You have to have a dongle installed on the computer that it's installed on, and then that's the only computer you can see it on. For us at work, the computer that's installed on is not where the densitometer is, and it just ends up being it's kind of a long story. It just ends up being not encouraging to use. So for a while now, I've wanted to know how I could do this on my own in Google, using Google spreadsheets, Google Sheets, and I finally figured out how to do it. It's pretty cool. Other than I'm not graphing the changes, which I think I could do. So here's what I've come up with. I have a control strip form. This is my form, and I'm just going to go ahead and fill one out really quick. So you would have your different machines. For us, all we have is paper processors. So I'm just saying we have an A and a B machine. I'm going to say this is for the A. And when you have a control strip, it has a reference ID because they themselves change. And the one we're on, I think, is PV1N. Yep. So you enter that in. And then here are the D-min readings, D-min red, green, and blue. I'm just going to put these in as what I think is a normal value. LD red. Again, just making up stuff. So that was LD, low density, red, green, and blue. And now you got high density, red, green, and blue. And let's see. Can't remember what these are supposed to be. We'll just say they're around 120. Now you got D-max, the maximum density, red, green, and blue. We'll say these are 200. And then the last one is Y-max blue. This is usually around 18. Once I have that all filled in, I click submit. And then that gets put into this spreadsheet under form responses 1. I'm a little scared to rename this. I don't know what happens if I rename this. And you can see 146, it's 146. Yep, that's the one I just did. And it just has a column in this sheet for every one of those form fields. And then it added a timestamp column for the date. So here you can see I put in that it was machine ID A, and here is the reference ID, and then here are all the values I entered in. And now when I go down here, so this is just the raw response from the form. From there, I go to a data sheet where I add in some information, and then finally you end up on a sheet for just each machine. And this is the one I just did, and everything on here is for this machine A. And now you can see I've compared my reading for D-min red with what the reference was. And the reference, when I did this form, I chose machine A. Another choice in the dropdown was new reference, and that's where I read all these values for what the reference read. And this is with the correction factors already applied. When you get a reference sheet, when you get a control strip from the manufacturer and it's already been processed, they also give you some correction values that I have no idea what they mean. I think they're very strange. And I've applied those correction values to the reference control strip value readings. And so here on this sheet, Anytime I have a machine A control strip that I've read, it's going to show up here. Same for B. And I'm doing the calculations already. I entered in a little gap here so it's easy to see LD. And one of the things you do is subtract the HD values from LD and compare that to the reference values, HD minus LD. And then I've got some color coding for when the difference is more than 10 or 12 or maybe 15. I'm not sure what I did exactly. And then you got Dmax values here in yellow. So some of this, how to do HD minus LD for my strip that I read is, and then compare that to the reference strip provided by the manufacturer. It was kind of tricky. It took me I've thought about how to do this for a few years, and now that I've learned some stuff about Google Sheets, I finally figured out how to do it. So now we'll go over some of what we did here. I'll go back to the form. So I showed you the data entry version of the form. Here's the design view of the form, and this is all just very simple. The first one is just a drop down, and then you can add another choice here very easily. Put new reference in there for when you're reading a reference strip. If you had another machine, you would add in another one for that machine. And then the rest of these are just short answer, and then you type in whatever you want the column name to be. And then I've set them all to be required. There's nothing particularly magical going on here. It's not a quiz. I don't want to collect their email address. That's basically it for the form. And then somewhere on here it tells you where the form is going. Right, and then under responses it tells you where the sheet's going. I'm not sure how you control all this, and that's why when I'm on the sheet I'm a little scared to change the text of form responses 1. I don't want to break anything, and it's working, so we're happy. So once you have the form responses, the first thing I did was make a new sheet that's called data, where I pull in all of the form responses by doing a query. So in this very top field, I have a query. And what the query does is it says form responses 1 is the data that I want to make a query on. And here is the range on that form, A1 through P. And if you go back over here, A1 is this field, and then I'm saying I want it to go all the way over to P, which is the last column. I'm not bothering to set where the bottom of this is, so I'm not saying P8 or something like that, because it wouldn't pick up the next response. So I've left off the number on P. So this is the data for the query. And then the query itself is select star. Star means everything, where B, column B, is not equal to new reference. And then the A is not null, so that it's not pulling in empty rows. I'm not sure if I needed to do that or not. Other times I have. But by saying that column B here, machine ID, is not equal to new reference, this line is not showing up over here. This is just the machines, A and B. So that gets all of these columns up to P. And then here I needed to do a calculation of HD minus LD for red, which is G and J. And if you look here, I've done another query, and I think I could do this a little bit better. I said select J minus G, so it's doing the math on those two columns where A is not null and B is not equal to new reference. That part's the same as the other query as far as where A is not null and B is not equal to new reference. And then I had to give it a label, J minus G, and then the label is empty, an empty quote, so the label is nothing. If you don't do that, for some reason, when you do this calculation, J minus G, it tries to put in its own header, even though this comma 0 at the end is for headers, and I'm saying I don't want a header. But it doesn't, if you have the calculation, it doesn't respect that. And I ended up doing this 3 times I didn't actually need to do that. I've learned a little bit since then that I could just go up here, select J minus G. Let's see. What's the next one? The next one is K minus H, L minus I, K minus H. So I could also go K minus H, L minus I think is what it is. And here's where you'll see that if I don't do the label, and it's got an error. I think it's saying it won't expand it because I have this here. There we go. And now you can see it put this as the label on there. I don't want that because I got my own label up there. So let's see, we go back here and then label J minus G. And then it's also K minus H, and then it's empty quotes, comma, and then L minus I, empty quotes. I don't think I need that comma. Right, there we go. Now we're back to where we were before with one less little formula in here. That's pretty good. So that gets me the calculation for HD minus LD on each one of these rows. And then the trick is over here. How do you get, I need to pull in the reference data so I can compare the reference readings to my readings on my control strip. So when you go back to this form, here is a row that says new reference, and it's got PV1N as the reference ID. There's only ever going to be one PV1N reference. At least there should be. There's no way there's ever going to be another one of those. I sure hope not. So what I've done is only for each row, this is a filter and it's not a query. So I then pasted this into this whole column. I'll show you that in a second. So this filter is saying if NA, I'll go over that in a minute. That means there's an error, and I'm saying if there's not an error. Filter form response 1. So again, it's going back over to the form response sheet, and it's pulling in this data B1 through P. What is that? B1, right? Through P, through the end. Form response 1. This is for the filter. This is my first comparison. On form response 1, if column B is equal to new reference and form response, this is a second comparison, form response 1 column C is equal to C2 in this sheet. C2, PV1N. So I'm saying if it's a new reference under machine ID and that reference ID matches this row, PV1N, then show me everything B through P. And then the trick is that this is just for this row. So all that data disappeared. This is row 2. And if I paste this in here, this is not correct because it's still comparing C2. If I highlight the whole thing and paste it in there, this is where there's a trick. Copy this, highlight this, paste it, and now I've pasted that formula into every column, but the C value here, 18, corresponds to the row. And then that's where this if NA comes in on the filter. If I get rid of this, now you have an NA. So if when I pasted that into the whole column, all of these columns below where there's no data would say NA, and I don't want that. Oops. Went one too far. So this is actually on a formula on every single row, whereas this query is only on this one top field here, and then the one where I did the calculation over here. But this has to be on every single row. So now I have the reference values for control strip PV1N, that batch of control strips. These numbers over here are all identical. But they could change at any time. Eventually we'll finish up the PV1N batch and this will be a new reference ID. But this will still draw in the correct one based on the value on each row, because that's what's in this formula. It's checking against C7. What is C7? C7 is this value, and let's go look for something that says new reference and has that same value, which is going to be this row. Okay, so that gets you all the data for your control strips reading, and then in the same row gives you the reference readings. And now all you have to do is compare, do some math to subtract this from the other one or whatever to get the difference. And so here I have another sheet where I'm going to do a query to do this. And this is going to be on machine A. Got to go one more over. Here is my query. I'm using my own headers, so this isn't part of it. This is me typing this in. And here's the beginning of my query. Now I'm querying the data sheet, this sheet, A1 through AH. Again, there's no number on the AH. AH is how far it goes over, H. And then I'm using a select statement, and you can actually do math inside the select. So I'm saying select column A, column B, column C. When you get to column D, I'm selecting column D minus column V. And if you go back over here, column D is my dmin red. Column V is the reference dmin red. I didn't put the headers over here, but I know they're all RGB, RGB, RGB. And then I'm doing the next one. So that's green, that's blue. And then here I'm selecting a single space, and that's what gives me this break here. When I didn't have the break here, this all ran together, and especially with the color coding, it was hard to read. And the trick there is that this one is one space, this one's two spaces, this one's three spaces. If you don't do that, it gives you an error because you already selected one space and it's unhappy about that. And then I just keep doing that to do all the comparisons, the HDLD. I have to do some additional, I have to subtract HDLD for the reference and then subtract that from my reading that's on the other sheet. And then in here, after I do all the selects, I'm saying where column B is equal to A, because this is sheet A for machine A. And if I change that to B, then it'll be the same as what this sheet is. So whatever you name the machines in the drop down on the form is what goes there. And then I'm saying and A column is not null, and then B is not equal to new reference, because the new reference ones aren't my plots, they're the reference. And then sort of showed this already with the labels. If you do the calculation in the select, then you end up with all these labels, and to get rid of them you have to say label once. You only do label once, and then you do the column, which is the same as in your select column. So column A, the label for it is empty string, two single quotes. And somewhere in here, this is all within double quotes. You have to be careful, right? This whole select is within double quotes. Once you're inside the select, you can only use single quotes. So A space The header for it is going to be nothing because I did my own headers. You have to do this for every single thing. So this is just, how do I do that? Right, I have it in this. So once you get down to the label, this is just the same as this select. It just has a space and then empty single quotes to get rid of the label that it's going to auto-generate since I did math on this select. It's going to automatically say difference or something in parentheses. And even on the spaces, you have to do this. So that's 2 spaces, and that's this second 2 space to give me the breaks within the columns, make it easier to read. Whew, a little complicated. Once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy though. And that's it. The color coding's pretty easy. You just do that under formats, conditional formatting, and you can see some of my different color coding things that I have going on there. And I think that's it. Here's the one for B, same thing. And most of all that was, to be able to do this, was to come up with this query to give the data sheet, and then this query to do the, this is for each row, and you have to be careful to use these dollar signs. These dollar signs say that when I paste this formula, I want C1 to stay there. I don't, this one, if I paste it into row 3, I want it to change to C3, in row 4 C4. But on this, it has to say fixed to C1, and that's what the dollar sign does. Same thing here and here. If you don't put the dollar sign there, then they change for each row number. And that's it. I'm sure I could add graphs to this to make it more like a standard plot thing, but I actually think it's easier to read like this. And you can see a trend here just fine, and I think that'll be fine.